Good evening and welcome to In Focus, where we bring you closer to the stories shaping our region and the world. Tonight we examine the Gaza ceasefire agreement draft, a 42-day phased plan reported by sources, including the Israeli Broadcasting Authority. The proposal aims to hold the conflict, deliver humanitarian relief, and pave the way for long-term peace in Gaza. While it promises military de-escalation, aid and prisoner exchanges, skepticism persists. Can this plan bring lasting peace, or is it another tool for maintaining control and aggression? The humanitarian crisis in Gaza has reached unprecedented levels, with tens of thousands killed and vital infrastructure destroyed. This ceasefire agreement proposes measures to address these challenges, including aid deliveries, the return of displaced residents, and infrastructure rehabilitation. Here are the key humanitarian provisions of this agreement. Return of displaced residents. Israeli forces will withdraw from key areas, allowing displaced residents to return home in phases. Humanitarian aid. 600 aid trucks will enter Gaza daily, delivering food, fuel, and medicine to address immediate needs. Rebuilding infrastructure. Hospitals, schools, and utilities will be rehabilitated to restore essential services. Temporary housing for those who cannot return home. Temporary shelters will be also provided. International oversight. Egypt, Qatar, and the United Nations will monitor and support the implementation of these measures. But can these promises truly alleviate the suffering of Gaza's people, or are they insufficient given the scale of the devastation? A final draft for a Gaza ceasefire and detainee exchange deal has been sent to Israel and Hamas following a breakthrough in negotiations held in Doha. The talks included Israeli intelligence officials from US envoy and Qatar's prime minister. Israeli media reported cautious progress, noting minor issues remaining regarding the first group of detainees to be released. Negotiators expressed optimism, with efforts underway to finalize the agreement soon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office announced that he discussed progress in Gaza detainee release negotiations with US President Joe Biden. Netanyahu informed Biden about the directives given to the Israeli negotiating team in Doha, emphasizing their efforts to secure the release of detainees. Talks remain ongoing as both sides work toward a resolution. Joining us tonight is Khalid Dawood, managing editor at Al Ahram Weekly, who will help us analyze both the humanitarian and strategic dimensions of this agreement. Let's begin by exploring the humanitarian implications. A very warm welcome, sir, to our show. And of course, this is a turning point and a very important topic that I think we have the pleasure to discuss with you, sir. What immediate impact could the withdrawal of Israeli forces and the return of displaced residents have on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza?
Well, thank you for having me. Of course, in case the agreement is concluded, as all the indications are showing, one of the top priorities will be improving the extremely deteriorating humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. According to the documents that are being leaked so far, whether by Israeli media or by Arab media sources, immediately upon reaching the temporary ceasefire agreement, at least 600 trucks of aid, including very much needed fuel, will be allowed into the Gaza Strip to provide assistance to the Palestinian people living in hellish conditions in Gaza. Of course, the United Nations agencies will be requested to take the top lead in distributing this aid and the fuel on the hospitals and the key cities that are going to be receiving those shipments. And of course, as well, according to this proposed agreement, there's going to be immediate building of thousands of caravans and tents for displaced Palestinians. And finally, as well, supposedly, many Palestinians will be allowed to return to their homes, such as Rafah and Qnews, or in the middle parts, or most importantly, the northern parts that have been nearly totally evacuated by the Israeli occupation forces that have been going on in the north, basically erasing entire cities and refugee camps, particularly naming Jabalia refugee camp, although the conditions of the return of those displaced Palestinians remain to be rather unclear until today, and whether they would include all Palestinians or would be limited to women and children first, and what kind of search they will be subjected to by the Israeli forces in case this return is being allowed. So definitely,
Sir, with all the obstacles that you just mentioned, and of course with optimism, we accepted and we listened and we watched this agreement, a ceasefire, Gaza ceasefire agreement draft, which of course was of optimism to all of us, and of course to everybody that's watching, that's happening in Gaza today. Do you think with all of these obstacles that are facing the entire community or the people of Gaza and the Palestinians, all these can be resolved, sir? And can Israel at one point give a word and implement the words that they give all the time and they never do anything about?
Well, I mean, again, considering the experience of the past 16 months, I mean, even the point of reaching an agreement itself will remain a subject of controversy and actually announced by the concerned party, mainly Hamas and the Israeli side. I mean, again, we've heard several times, starting from the beginning of 2024, from the outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden and other top officials, that an agreement is very close. But even up until yesterday, the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, he said that he believes the agreement is close, but he cannot guarantee 100% until this agreement is being announced by the concerned parties. The indications seem to be positive more than anything else, considering the presence of top U.S. negotiators in the Qatari capital, Doha, both from the current Biden administration and the incoming Donald Trump administration. But again, nothing is going to be 100% certain, or the exact details are going to be known until this agreement is being announced. Because, as you probably know, I mean, one of the key obstacles even is Israel's readiness to agree to a key Hamas demand about that any ceasefire agreement or temporary ceasefire agreement that we reached be a first step towards a total end of the war in Gaza, which is something that Israeli Prime Minister and his extremist government have refused to accept so far. It's a very difficult situation. The conditions of the release of the Israeli hostages and how many Palestinians.
Okay, sir, with Gaza's infrastructure in ruins, how feasible, sir, is the agreement's plan to restore hospitals, schools, and utilities?
It's a huge responsibility. I mean, it's a huge challenge. But at the same time, I mean, as you've mentioned, and according to the UN reports, almost 80% of Gaza's buildings and infrastructure has been totally destroyed. But again, the key point is the beginning of the ceasefire and the exchange of hostages. If this stage passes successfully, everybody's been speaking about an initial stage of 6 to 7 weeks. Then we can speak about the long-term responsibility of rebuilding Gaza and its infrastructure, which is something UN experts and Palestinian officials have said would take practically years. And that's why, again, part of the challenge and part of the agreement should be Israelis allowing inside Gaza construction material, which they have banned over the past 16 months, as well as construction equipment. Of course, Egypt and the United Arab Emirates and Qatar are all countries that have expressed readiness to take part in this huge challenge. But again, everybody will be waiting for the language that's going to be agreed to on how we will reach a total end of the Israeli war and not just a suspension of hostilities as the Israeli Prime Minister has been demanding.
Sir, the plan involves delivering 608 trucks daily. How can this be achieved effectively under current conditions, sir, that are taking place in Gaza?
Well, again, part of the big challenge is the situation concerning the control of the Rafah crossing point between Egypt and Gaza. As you've known, after Israel unilaterally conducted its military operation inside Rafah, Egypt has been insisting on the total withdrawal of the Israeli troops from the Palestinian side of the border in case the border were to be reopened and those kinds of trucks and construction material and construction equipment were to be allowed. So again, this is one of the thorny topics that everybody will be waiting to see how it's going to be resolved. Hamas has shown some flexibility on this matter after insisting at the beginning on total Israeli withdrawal from Rafah. They agreed probably about a gradual withdrawal, maintaining some sort of temporary Israeli presence on the Rafah border. But again, it's a very complicated and lengthy process. And of course, the key starting point, probably after 1 week of calm, and after Hamas manages to collect the Israeli hostages that are going to be released at the first stage, then we are going to get to know exactly the depth of the Israeli withdrawal, not just from Rafah, but also from the so-called Netzarim corridor in the middle of Gaza that's divided the strip, as well as from the Rafah border, and whether they are also going to pull out from the northern parts and allow the displaced Palestinians to go back to their homes. So it's all questionable. The Israeli side and the Israeli Prime Minister, after the Trump gets into the White House again in a week, or less than a week actually, is going to expect more understanding and flexibility from the U.S. side. But again, we've clearly heard from the U.S. President, the incoming U.S. President Donald Trump, using his own words, that all hell will break loose in the Middle East if no agreement is reached before he gets into the White House on Monday, and that this so-called hell will not just be limited to Gaza and the Hamas group, but also Israel will need to pay a price for this if there is truly going to be an agreement, and if we are going to see some serious U.S. pressure on the Israeli side and not just on the Palestinian side.
So you're going to see, Mr. Dawood, thank you for your insights on the humanitarian aspects of this agreement. Please stay with us as we transition to discuss the political and strategic dimension of the ceasefire agreement. Don't go away. Now let's shift to the political and strategic aspects of the ceasefire agreement. While it outlines a phased withdrawal of Israeli forces and a sustainable calm, that there are doubts about Israel's intentions. Past agreements, like the ceasefire in southern Lebanon, have shown how promises of peace can be undermined by continued incursions and aggression. The political and strategic provisions include phased military withdrawal. Israeli forces will leave populated areas but remain near Gaza's borders. Detainees exchanges. Detainees will be released in phases, although concerns persist about Israelis' sincerity. In direct negotiations, talks will address unresolved issues, including the exchange of soldiers and detainees. The role of international grantors, Egypt, Qatar, the US, will oversee implementation, but their influence on Israel remains uncertain. Regional impact. The agreement's success or failure could reshape regional dynamics and influence future peace negotiations. Will this ceasefire be different, or is it another temporary measure that maintains the status quo of control and conflict? Let's continue our conversation with Mr. Khalid Dawood to unpack these issues. How significant is the phased withdrawal of Israeli forces in preventing further escalation, and what risks remain with their continued presence near Gaza?
Well, I think that the key risk is the Israeli government itself and the so-called extremist members of the Israeli government, as we're talking about Ben Gvir, the national security or the national security minister, and the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich. Again, they've already started making statements about how this agreement undermines Israel's security, and they'll definitely be looking for any excuse to resume the war at any time. And that's one of the key fears, actually, of the Hamas movement. If there was no clear language about a total end of the war in Gaza, that this would be an excuse for Israel to remain inside the Gaza Strip and to resume its military operations, as we have seen after the very short ceasefire that lasted for 1 week in November of 2023. So again, that's going to be one of the key challenges, the behavior of the Israeli government itself and its expectation.
Yes, sir. Here comes the question, the behavior of the Israeli government and the Israeli Prime Minister. Where does this stand from any agreement that's taking place or any ceasefire that's taking place?
Well, again, there are a lot of pressures that are being practiced on the Israeli Prime Minister, not just from the incoming US President Donald Trump, but within Israel itself. The Israeli public is probably the majority of it. We can go up to 60% is totally fed up with this war that has inflicted heavy losses on the Israeli side. I mean, again, after the Israeli operation started in northern parts of Gaza, nearly 100 Israeli soldiers have been killed. And over the past week alone, we've seen several incidents in which scores of Israeli soldiers have been killed or injured. So, I mean, again, that's a key pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister, whether he's going to be able to sustain the pressure from the families of the hostages, from the soldiers themselves who've been serving for a very long time, unprecedented times within Israel itself, 16 months. The population of the areas bordering Gaza who want to go back to their settlements. These are all among the pressures that are going to be important to see on the Israeli side. But at the same time, there is some also a key obstacle, which is the so-called day after. Who's going to be responsible for Gaza when this agreement gets into effect? I mean, again, the Israeli side, Benjamin Netanyahu has been repeating all the time that he's not going to allow Hamas to govern Gaza again, and that it's not only that he wants to end its military capabilities, but also its governing capabilities. And at the same time, it remains to be unknown who's going to be responsible for the Gaza Strip and for the distribution of the aid in case the ceasefire takes effect. There's been lots of talk about some sort of a technocratic committee made up of Palestinians that are neither Hamas nor Palestinian Authority to take care of this matter. But again, this is not something that's not going to be known before an agreement is announced probably by the end of the week, according to Jake Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor. The news reports have been speaking about Thursday or Friday maximum, because again, when the incoming U.S. President Donald Trump sends his own Middle East peace envoy, Steve Witkoff, to be present in Doha and to shuttle between Doha and Tel Aviv to meet with the Israeli Prime Minister, probably there's something moving, along with the presence of key Qatari negotiations, Egyptian top intelligence officials, and there are even some reports that if there is any agreement to be announced, this would be happening from Egypt, because again, the Egyptian side will bear a lot of responsibility in carrying out this agreement, considering the joint border between Egypt and Gaza and Egypt's historic relations with the Gaza Strip.
Sir, what role can guarantors like Egypt, Qatar, and the United States realistically play in ensuring that Israel adheres to the agreement?
It all depends on the positive effort of Egypt, Qatar, and the incoming U.S. administration to make this agreement a success. Nearly all, if not the majority of the aid, is going to be coming into Gaza.
Sorry to interrupt you, but who is going to take the credit for this ceasefire if it is implemented?
All three parties are going to be taking credit: the Egyptians, the Qataris, the Americans, as well as
the Americans, the old administration or the new administration, sir, or the incoming administration, the leaving administration, which either or? Biden or Donald Trump?
It's both. It's both. I mean, the current Biden administration has been involved directly in the negotiations, but again,
so you see, sir, that the Biden administration and the coming administration play and stand on the same ground in this ceasefire if it takes place.
There have been continuous contacts between the two sides, according to the statements. I'm not speaking about inside information,
yes, of course, sir,
according to the statements that are being made by the Biden administration, by the Trump administration, there's close coordination. As you know, the representative of U.S. President Joe Biden, Brett McGurk, is in Doha, along with Steve Witkoff, the Middle East envoy of the incoming Trump administration. So, I mean, it's already Trump has been acting like the actual president of the United States through his threats and through his pledges. Yes. So again, that's why I'm saying it's both administrations, the administration of Joe Biden that has been working on the details over the past year, and the threats and the twists and the statements that are being made by the Trump administration, because the agreement itself, everybody knows, will be implemented under the Trump administration, so they definitely have to be involved.
Sir, given Israel's history of violating ceasefires, can this agreement be enforced in a way that prevents a repeat of southern Lebanon's failures, sir?
Nothing is guaranteed, as you rightly mentioned. The situation in southern Lebanon.
Nothing is guaranteed with Israel and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? Or nothing is guaranteed?
Personally, I cannot trust this Israeli Prime Minister nor his government after all the crimes that he's been committing inside Gaza and the genocide war he's been conducting that led to him being a practically wanted person by the International Criminal Court, along with the former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. So you're not talking about like people who've respected any agreements or any humanitarian standards that are even known within war situations. So of course, as I said, I mean, the Israeli Prime Minister throughout the past 16 months has proved that he's always giving priority to his own the political future, to the future of this
To his
extremist
objectives,
coalition
sir.
that's been governing
To his
Israel.
own objectives.
That's why, I mean, again, nothing is guaranteed, and it will require continuous pressure from the American side, from the Egyptian side, from the Qatari side, and the Emirati side, if I might add that as well.
Okay, Mr. Dawood, in 10 seconds, because I have to wrap up this episode now. Are you optimistic?
Cautious
Okay,
optimism, because again, this war has stretched so
cautious
far.
on this final note, sir, we end today's episode. Thank you very much, Mr. Khalid Dawood, for your amazing, informative analysis and fascinating one of political and strategic challenges within this agreement. As you've highlighted, its success depends not only on the commitments of the parties involved, but also on robust enforcement mechanisms. Tonight, we've delved into the draft Gaza ceasefire agreement, examining its promises from humanitarian relief and its broader political implications. While it offers a framework for peace, Israel's track record and the ongoing suffering in Gaza remind us to approach it with caution. True peace requires accountability, justice, and an end to aggression. Thank you for joining us on In Focus, and we'll see you next time as we continue to bring you the stories that matter most.